Hello, dear soul. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, I'll tell you the story of the oldest royal family in the world, the Japanese Imperial family. For over 2,600 years, their sacred line has never broken. From divine myth to modern life, they have carried the soul of Japan through every century. This isn't a story of war or power. It's a story of meaning, memory, and quiet continuity. So close your eyes now and let this gentle journey carry you into peaceful sleep with love and whispers. What if your family didn't just come from ancient nobility, but from the sun itself? Imagine a royal bloodline so old, so sacred, so unbroken, that its origin isn't written in parchment, but painted in starlight and legend. That's the story of Japan's imperial family. They don't claim to descend from kings, or warlords, or conquerors. They claim descent from the heavens, from a goddess named Amaterasu, the radiant deity of the sun, whose light still blesses every morning on the Japanese archipelago. According to Japan's oldest chronicles, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, written over 1,300 years ago, the gods convened in the celestial realm and chose a descendant to bring peace and order to the earth. Not just any descendant, but Ninigi no Mikoto, the grandson of Amaterasu herself. She gave him 3 sacred treasures before he descended: a mirror to reflect purity and truth, a curved jewel to symbolize wisdom and compassion, and a sword forged in legend to defend justice and courage. These treasures are not metaphor. They still exist today, guarded by shrines, hidden from the public, only seen by emperors during enthronement ceremonies. Their locations are sacred. The sword rests in Atsuta Shrine, in Nagoya, the jewel in the Imperial Palace, and the mirror at Ise Grand Shrine, Japan's holiest site. From Ninigi's line came Emperor Jimmu, Japan's first emperor, said to have taken the throne in 660 BCE. His enthronement marks the traditional founding of Japan itself. To this day, February 11th is celebrated as National Foundation Day, not because of war or constitution, but because of the divine light that passed through generations. And the most astonishing part? The current emperor, Naruhito, is officially recognized as the 126th direct descendant in that same line. No revolutions have severed it. No foreign powers have erased it. Not even World War II brought it down. It is the longest continuous monarchy in the history of humanity, older than the pharaohs, the Caesars, the Ottomans, the British, an unbroken chain stretching from the heavens to now. What does the world's oldest royal family look like when it has no castles, no crowns, no armies? Long before Tokyo's bright lights and Kyoto's golden temples, the land of Japan was a canvas of green and mist. There were no samurai, no emperors in gilded halls, only scattered clans, each guarding their valleys like secret gardens, each with their own gods, their own totems, their own dreams of power. But among them, one family rose, not with swords, but with ritual. They were the Yamato clan, settled near modern-day Nara. They didn't conquer with flames and siege engines. They conquered minds and spirits. They performed sacred harvest festivals. They claimed divine ancestry, and they formed bonds with other powerful families through marriage, trade, and myth. By the 3rd century, they had begun to call themselves rulers, By the 5th century, they had become Tenno, heavenly sovereigns. But unlike Western kings, they didn't sit on thrones of steel. They sat cross-legged on tatami mats, in palaces made of cypress wood and paper walls, where the wind whispered through bamboo gardens and power was measured by elegance, not force. Their court didn't just pass laws, it danced them into being, with incense, poetry, and sacred offerings to the kami, the spirits of nature. What's even more curious, the early Japanese emperors were often priest-kings. Their main role wasn't military leadership. It was conducting the rituals that kept the seasons turning, the rice growing, the people safe from misfortune. Every year, the emperor performed a rice-planting ceremony that symbolically ensured the fertility of the entire nation. He didn't need to fight wars, because he held something far older than a sword. He held the favor of the gods. And yet, there were no coins stamped with his face, no statues, no monuments shouting his name, just a quiet, powerful presence, a sun that rose every morning, whether noticed or not. Even today, the emperor is called the symbol of the unity of the people, not a ruler of politics, but a spiritual axis, a still point around which the nation turns. How many monarchies have faded, lost to revolt and regime change? Yet the Japanese imperial house, without castles, without battles, survived because it didn't rely on power. It relied on meaning. What if the most powerful people in the country spent their days writing love poems by candlelight? Step into a world where beauty was law, where silk was layered like seasons, and where power came not from armies, but from the way you turned a phrase. Welcome to the Heian era, a time when Japan's emperors ruled not with swords, but with symbols, syllables, and scented ink. It began in the year 794, when the capital moved to a new city, Kyoto, then called Heian-kyo, the capital of peace and tranquility. And oh, what a capital it was! Imagine this, a city designed in perfect grid form, like the Chinese Tang capital of Chang'an, but softened with gardens, canals, and flowering trees, a place where every corner was designed for elegance, where courtiers judged one another on how gracefully they walked, how poetically they sighed, and how many layers of color they could wear without looking overwhelmed. In this time, the emperor was still the heart of the nation, but no longer its military arm. The Fujiwara clan, a powerful noble family, began to shape court politics by marrying their daughters into the imperial line. For centuries, they became the quiet hand behind the throne. But the emperor, he remained the soul, and that soul was expressed through culture, not conquest. In fact, during the Heian period, to be considered refined, you were expected to compose poetry on the spot, to write in at least 2 scripts, Chinese and Japanese, and to recognize 50 shades of cherry blossom. Courtship between lovers didn't begin with conversation. It began with an exchange of handwritten poems, and if your calligraphy was shaky or your metaphor uninspired, you might never receive a reply. Even clothing was a form of language. Aristocratic women wore junihito, 12 layered silk robes, each layer a different hue of the season, carefully selected to match the mood of the day: autumn rust, spring pink, twilight gray. And in this glowing world of stillness and sound, the emperor stood, a symbol of celestial calm. He lived in a palace complex that echoed with the rustle of robes, the whisper of folding fans, and the soft tap of brushes on rice paper. It was during this time that the world's first novel was born, The Tale of Genji, written by Murasaki Shikibu, a noblewoman of the court. It tells the story of a fictional prince, elegant, flawed, romantic, and offers an intimate glimpse into Heian court life. And the emperors? They weren't just reading it, they were writing too. Emperor Saga, who reigned in the early 9th century, was a celebrated calligrapher and patron of the arts. He even created the kana writing system, the phonetic Japanese script still used today. In the Heian court, you were powerful not because you owned land, but because you could capture the fleeting beauty of morning dew or express the ache of moonlight through a haiku. Imagine a palace so quiet you could hear the snow fall on a bamboo roof. That was Heian Japan. A golden age where silence was a melody and the emperor a poet at the center of the dream. What happens when the emperor is still worshipped but no longer rules? Imagine a kingdom where the throne still stood, but the hands that moved the nation no longer wore the crown. A quiet shift, like a shadow moving behind a silk screen. This was the dawn of Japan's military rule, when the emperor remained divine, but power slipped, silently, into the hands of the shoguns. The transition began in the late 1100s, after a century of rising warrior clans and waning court influence. Far from the elegant halls of Kyoto, provincial lords, called daimyo, were growing strong. The Fujiwara grip had loosened. The court's world of poetry and perfume couldn't command the armored horsemen who now held real force. Then came the turning point, the Genpei War. Two noble clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, fought for control of the empire. In the end, it was Minamoto no Yoritomo who emerged victorious. But rather than claim the throne for himself, he did something unprecedented. In 1192, he was granted the title of Shogun, barbarian subduing generalissimo, by the emperor. And just like that, the political power of Japan moved out of the palace and into the hands of warriors. The emperor still performed sacred rituals, still maintained the imperial bloodline, still received the divine treasures. But from this point forward, he was more symbol than sovereign. For the next 700 years, Japan would be ruled by military governments. First the Kamakura shogunate, then the Ashikaga, and finally the Tokugawa, whose rule lasted over 2 centuries. And through all of it, the emperors remained in Kyoto, like glowing lanterns in a darkened temple, never extinguished, only veiled. It is one of history's great paradoxes. The emperor was revered as a living deity, but was often forbidden to leave the palace. He had the divine right to rule, but not the army to enforce it. Some emperors were even placed on the throne as children, used as ceremonial faces while the shoguns pulled the strings from Edo. Yet the emperor's presence remained essential. Only he could approve appointments. Only he could perform certain rituals tied to the land, the harvest, the gods, and above all, only the emperor could possess the imperial regalia, the sword, the mirror, the jewel. Even the shoguns, with their vast armies and iron rule, never dared to claim those treasures, because to do so would be to challenge the sun itself. And so, behind the lacquered armor and cherry blossom banners, the imperial flame continued, quietly, steadily, eternally. The emperor became like Mount Fuji, rarely seen, shrouded in clouds, yet always there, watching over the nation from a distance. In a world of warlords and rising castles, the chrysanthemum throne did not crumble. It endured, unmoving, untouched, unbroken, waiting for the moment it would rise again. What if the world's oldest royal family suddenly became powerful again, not just in ceremony, but in steam trains, battleships, and foreign policy? After centuries behind palace screens, the Emperor of Japan didn't just return. He led a revolution that changed the course of Asia. This was the Meiji Restoration, a miracle of rebirth where the emperor stepped out of myth and into modernity. The year was 1868. Japan stood on a knife's edge. For over 250 years, the Tokugawa shogunate had ruled the nation in strict isolation, closing its ports, forbidding foreign influence, and maintaining an almost timeless world of rice fields and samurai codes. But the world was changing. Western powers were knocking at the door, with iron ships and diplomatic threats. America had already forced Japan to open its harbors. The old ways could no longer hold, and in the midst of this storm, the emperor rose. Emperor Meiji was just 15 years old when he was placed on the throne, but behind him was a powerful alliance of reformist samurai and nobles, who saw the throne as the only institution ancient enough, sacred enough, to unite the country and face the modern world. And so, the shogunate was abolished. The samurai class lost its privileges. The emperor was restored as the central figure of power for the first time in over 700 years. But this wasn't just a return to tradition. It was a leap into the future. Emperor Meiji, draped not in silk but in Western military dress, oversaw the creation of railroads, telegraph lines, modern factories, and universities. He sent students to study in Europe. He welcomed foreign advisors to help build a modern navy and army. He even adopted a constitutional monarchy in 1889, introducing the Meiji Constitution, modeled partly on Germany's. The court, once secluded and poetic, became a symbol of modernization. A young empress began appearing in public, the first in centuries, wearing Western gowns and supporting girls' education. And perhaps the most astonishing twist, Japan, once a secluded island of feudal lords, became the first non-Western power to defeat a European empire. In the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, for the first time in modern history, a nation outside the West had risen to full military, economic, and technological power, all under the symbol of the Chrysanthemum throne. But even amid all this modernity, the emperor remained sacred. Every morning, Emperor Meiji would bow before the sun goddess at Heisei Shrine. He maintained the ancient rituals, even as he signed trade agreements and military orders. He was somehow a living bridge between 8th century kami and 19th century steam engines. And as Japan stepped into the 20th century, the emperor stood at its center, not as a relic of the past, but as the quiet pilot of its future, a sun reborn, shining again. What happens when a god speaks, and for the first time the world hears his voice? It was a warm summer day, August 15th, 1945. Across Japan, families huddled by their radios. Static crackled. The emperor, the divine emperor, was about to speak. No one had ever heard his voice before, not once, not even in recordings. To the people of Japan, he was more presence than person, more celestial than human. But on that day, Emperor Hirohito would speak surrender. Let's go back a little. Hirohito became emperor in 1926, at the age of 25. By then, Japan was no longer a feudal island. It was a rising imperial power, with colonies in Taiwan and Korea, with battleships in its harbors, with a fierce military ambition and growing ultranationalism. For many, the emperor still represented a divine authority, a living descendant of Amaterasu. His word was sacred, his silence equally so. But during the 1930s and 40s, Japan's government fell increasingly under the influence of its military. Civilian voices were drowned out, and soon the path led to war, first with China, then with the West. The attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 launched Japan into global conflict. The emperor, still cloaked in layers of ritual, watched as the nation marched into total war. During these years, Hirohito appeared rarely in public. He remained a distant figure, sacred, silent. But everything changed in 1945. 2 atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Cities vanished in an instant. Over 100,000 lives gone in a single flash of light. Japan faced destruction, and Hirohito broke a sacred tradition. He recorded a speech, a radio broadcast, his first ever address to the people. He did not say the word surrender. Instead, he spoke of enduring the unendurable. He spoke in formal, imperial Japanese, so ornate and indirect that many people didn't immediately understand what he meant. But they knew the sound, the voice of a god. Was human after all. People wept in the streets. Some bowed to the ground. Others stood in stunned silence, as if hearing thunder fall from a clear sky. And when American forces arrived in Japan, another impossible image unfolded. General Douglas MacArthur standing next to Hirohito for a photograph. A divine ruler beside a foreign general in khaki boots. The occupation began, and Hirohito remained emperor. But something fundamental had changed. In 1946, he renounced his divinity in a formal statement. He would no longer be considered a living god. The imperial myth had ended. And yet, the Chrysanthemum throne endured. Hirohito remained Japan's monarch until his death in 1989. He guided the nation through its post-war recovery, through the miracle of its economic boom, through the silent dignity of rebuilding, from divine being to constitutional monarch. He watched Japan rise again, this time not through empire, but through innovation, culture, and peace. His reign, the Showa era, became one of the longest in world history, over 62 years. And when he died, the entire nation paused, because no matter how much the role had changed, the throne, that ancient thread through time, had held, even in war, even in ruin, even when gods fell silent. What's the point of a throne if it holds no power, no laws to pass, no armies to command, no wealth to redistribute, and yet the Japanese emperor remains, not because of politics, but because of something deeper, because of meaning. After World War II, Japan rewrote everything: its cities, its government, its constitution. And in that new charter, there's one line that captures it all. The emperor shall be the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people. Not a ruler, not a god, a symbol. At first glance, that might sound like a demotion, but in truth, it's something extraordinary. The emperor became a kind of national heartbeat, a ceremonial soul, a thread of living memory tying the Japan of legend to the Japan of tomorrow. Let's look at what that means. The emperor no longer chooses ministers. He doesn't command ships or declare war. He doesn't shape laws or sign treaties with independent will. And yet, he opens the Diet, Japan's parliament, every year. He receives new ambassadors. He performs over a dozen sacred rituals annually, most of them hidden from the public, carried out in ancient language, in sacred robes, inside rooms lit only by flickering oil lamps. There is the Daijosai, performed only once per reign, a harvest ritual connecting the emperor to the gods, to the land, to rice fields and spirits and history itself. Few have seen it. No cameras are allowed. Just the emperor, alone, offering rice to the kami, as his ancestors did 1,000 years ago. And yet the emperor is also present in modern life. He visits disaster zones after earthquakes and tsunamis, bowing low before the victims, offering not orders but presence, quiet empathy wrapped in ceremonial grace. When Emperor Akihito traveled to Okinawa, or to places ravaged by World War II, he spoke not as ruler, but as a witness. He expressed remorse for Japan's past, something no emperor had done before. He knelt, he bowed, he cried. And in those moments, people saw something more powerful than authority. They saw humility. They saw healing. For all the world's revolutions, all the republics and republicans who asked, "Why keep a monarchy?" Japan quietly answered, not for power, but for continuity, for ritual, for memory. In a world of noise and haste, the emperor remains a figure of stillness. He doesn't command, he doesn't legislate. But when he walks into a room, time slows, because that room, for just a moment, is connected to something older than any constitution, to the mirror, the jewel, and the sword, to sunlight and myth, to rice and rain, to the whisper of robes and the hush of mountains. The throne may hold no power, but it holds something just as rare, a living sense of meaning. What does it feel like to wake up knowing you are the 126th link in an unbroken chain that stretches back to the sun? This is the story of Emperor Naruhito, a soft-spoken scholar, a symbol of peace, and the latest living chapter in the world's oldest monarchy. He was born in 1960, in the sparkling post-war era, as Japan was transforming from ruins into one of the most advanced nations on Earth. His name, Naruhito, was carefully chosen to mean a man who will acquire virtue. From the very beginning, he was being prepared, not for political power, but for sacred responsibility. And yet his childhood was more ordinary than you might expect. He loved music. He plays the viola. He adored mountain hikes and train rides. He even wrote a book about medieval Japanese water transportation. As a young man, Naruhito studied at Gakushuin University, then went abroad to Oxford, becoming the first Japanese crown prince to study in Europe. There, he washed his own laundry, cooked his own food, and rode a bicycle through the English countryside, a far cry from Kyoto's lacquered corridors. And in 1993, he did something that once would have been unthinkable. He married a commoner. Her name was Masako Owada, an Oxford-educated diplomat fluent in multiple languages. Brilliant, poised, independent. But her transition into royal life was difficult, and for many years she retreated from the public eye, struggling with the pressure of becoming empress. Naruhito, ever the gentle partner, stood by her, always, softly, protectively, and slowly she returned. In 2019, Emperor Akihito became the first Japanese emperor to abdicate in over 2 centuries, stepping down in his mid-80s. He said he no longer had the physical strength to carry the weight of the role. And so, on May 1st, 2019, Naruhito ascended the Chrysanthemum throne. The Reiwa era, meaning beautiful harmony, had begun. There were no military parades, no explosions of power, just a quiet, precise ceremony with ancient language, folded robes, and the presentation of the 3 sacred treasures: the mirror, the jewel, the sword. Naruhito is now the symbol of the Japanese state. He speaks rarely, but always meaningfully. He visits schools, hospitals, disaster zones. He represents Japan not with speeches, but with dignity. And even though he rules nothing, he represents everything Japan chooses to remember and to become. A thread of silk stretched through time, from the age of gods to the digital age. Tonight, as you rest, somewhere in Tokyo, behind cedar walls and gardens raked to perfection, an emperor dreams, the 126th in a line that reaches back beyond history. He carries no sword, he holds no power, but he holds the memory of a nation. And in a world that forgets so easily, that dear soul may be the most powerful thing of all.